Hello wine lovers, Trophy Wine Hunter. Welcome back to my wine channel. Today I'm going to do a video on my Bordeaux Basics series and we're going to go through the first growth wines. In each successive video, I'm going to go through each class of the 1855 classification system and each wine and my views on each one. First growths are easy because there's only 5 of them, so it's going to be a shorter video. But I'll have more to say, obviously, about each one. So as a general rule, the first growth wines, by and large, have stayed the top wines in Bordeaux. And that's probably wise because, they probably get the most attention. They've always commanded the most price, and that means they probably have the most money, and that keeps that up. And so by and large, these are still, with any first growth wine you get, it is a occasion anytime you get to drink one. Don't pass up an opportunity. If someone says they'd like to serve your first growth, don't pass it up. And it's a special thing. And so the first wine I'm going to talk about is Chateau Lafite. So again, going back to the 1855 classification system, you can see my detailed video on this. It was produced in 1855 for a fair expo, and they were ranked by price per barrel and by reputation. So, and in fact, the 1855 classification systems, they actually ranked the wines in order. And then after that, there was some controversy, so they now have listed them in alphabetical order. But you can actually tell what wine they thought was the best wines. And so in 1855, the top wine of the first growth was Chateau Lafite. So we're going to start with there. Chateau Lafite, it was owned by the Segur family. So actually, at one time, the Segur family owned both Chateau Lafite and Chateau Latour. So in the 1855 system classification system, if you look at that list, it's listed as Chateau Lafite, not Chateau Lafite Rothschild. The Rothschilds only bought it in 1868 after it was classified. The other interesting thing is there's only 5 classified wines that actually were called Chateau. And I guess that means they had actually a winery on site. Now they're all called chateaus because they all have buildings or houses on site. But Chateau Lafite was one of these 5 chateaus. The other being Chateau Latour, Chateau Margaux, Chateau d'Issan, which is I think a 3rd growth, and then Chateau Beychevelle. So those were the only ones. Kind of a trivia knowledge. That's all you call it, okay? The label of Lafite has basically not changed over the years. So the only thing they've added in the recent while, and I'll try and close up on the labels a little bit later, is they've added on the etching on the top of the bottle, which is kind of 5 arrows, which I think represents the 5 brothers or families of Lafite. They also have kind of special labels, certain years, and they put a certain special thing on the labels. And everyone thinks that they just do this randomly. They don't do it randomly. They mark an event, but they also mark great vintages. And these are why vintages like 2018 that has a special label should be bought. Because obviously the winery is trying to signify to buyers, hey, this is a special year. So they've only done this, I think, 6 or 7 times. So the first time was 1985. There was a comment. This is the 1999, and you'll see a little sun and moon. I think it was an eclipse year. 2005, they have a scale. 2008, they had a red letter, the number 8 in Chinese. 2016, they had an hourglass, which represented kind of the changing vintage. It was kind of hot and cold and difficult vintage. And then 2018 has the 150th anniversary, which has just come out, which is has CL, which is the Roman numerals for 150, plus a little balloon. So these are specialized. My assessment of the wine is it's first in 1855. It's first now. It's always the one that's the most marketable. It's always the one that commands the biggest price by and large on a year by year basis. It's not going to be bad. So, and in fact, somehow it's gone out of favor to buy Lafite because maybe people bought too much Lafite in the last 10 years. it's a great wine, and I think it's a great time to buy Lafite, and it'll come back. It never goes out of style. It's never going to be bad. I have a total respect for Chateau Lafite. I would never turn down a vintage of Lafite. I don't think they make bad vintages at all. As to vintages, I've been fortunate enough to bring 25 different vintages of Chateau Lafite. Some of the most memorable for me is 1942 Lafite, probably because I was just stunned I could still drink it. 1959 Lafite, which is to me a 100-point wine. It was incredible. I've had 66 Lafite, which is great. The more current vintages, I actually love 99 as a vintage right now. I think it's a great vintage to drink. The 9 and 10 are great vintages also. 96 is one of my favorite also. Next, on the 1855 classification was Chateau Latour. Pretty boring. They don't change their label. They don't do very much. They're boring good, basically. Again, arguable which one you prefer, Chateau Latour or Chateau Lafite. It's always a great argument. In general, Chateau Lafite is a little bit more ethereal and a little bit more fragrant, softer. Latour is much more powerful in general. So Latour, a couple of years ago, changed so that they don't release their current wines, so that's why you don't see, for instance, the 2018 Latour. They actually go and hold back wines, and they release what they think is appropriate or what's drinkable at that time. So they have different releases out there. And for the 18, I'm not sure what they're releasing. I thought they released the 12, I think. But they'll release whatever they think is appropriate. Good and bad. I don't know if that's going to work out for them. It hasn't, I guess, hurt prices at this point. But they just feel that it's kind of ridiculous to release a wine that's not going to be drinkable, and that's true for most wines that you taste. Latour, again, is one of these wines. They don't make bad wines. They're not going anywhere. If you have a chance to buy a Latour, it's not going to get any cheaper. It's just going to go up. There are fans of this wine. It's not going to have a problem. Always a great wine. So again, merits the price, merits its status. I've had the privilege of drinking 28 vintages of Chateau Latour. It's funny because I actually prefer Chateau Lafite, and it looks like I've drank more of Latour, maybe because my friends like Latour. And again, this reiterates why it's important to have tasting notes and to write things down. I only know that I've drank 28 vintages because I've been taking notes, and this has only been since the last 5 or 6 years. So probably I've drank more vintages of this, but again, you really need to take notes of what you've drank because you forget, right? Some of the best vintages I can recall, I had a 31 Latour, and again, a lot of times with these older vintages, it's just so memorable, right? You can drink them. I had the 67, and surprisingly, I know people think 67 is a terrible year. It was great. I bought it for a very good price, and I wasn't expecting much, so maybe my expectations low. But I thought it was a wonderful wine. Other great wines, 88, 89, 90, 2000, 2005, all great vintages for Chateau Latour that I've enjoyed. Next wine on the list, which was listed third on the 1855 classification, Chateau Margaux. Another boringly exceptional wine. Always good. Little bit more variations than Lafite and Latour. I find that personally, in great vintages of Chateau Margaux are better than Lafite and Latour. But in general, if you any random vintage, in general, Lafite and Latour will be a little bit better for my palate compared to Margaux. But Margaux has some exceptional years, and it's not the years you accept. It's kind of like off vintages for other places that Margaux really shines. An example of that is 83 Margaux, which I really love. That's one of my favorite vintages, although now it's going into decline. 86 is another one of my favorite vintages. The other interesting fact about Chateau Margaux, it's the only wine or growth, I think, that's named after the region. So, the region is Margaux, and it's called Chateau Margaux. So that tells you how important, I guess, Margaux is to that region. As for special labels, Chateau Margaux produced a special label in 2015. I don't have it with me, but it's a black etched label like Chateau Mouton Rothschild's label that I'll show you later on, the 2000. Very similar to that. So that's going to be a collector's item and well priced. As to vintages that I've had, I've been fortunate to have 20 vintages of Chateau Margaux. As I said, 83 and 86 were some of my favorites, although they are kind of declining. 95 was one of my favorites, and I just checked my tasting note of that, and I said to that, I would love to have this wine every night. So I guess I was really impressed with that. 05 was another standout vintage that I recall. And in general, I do really enjoy Chateau Margaux. It's a lighter style, very fragrant. And in good years, it's exceptional, and in good years I prefer it to everything else. Just talking about whether it deserves its place, for sure. Again, great wine. It does have more variation than Chateau Lafite and Chateau Latour. It does have some vintages and off vintages and not as strong vintages. It can be not as good as some of the other first growths, but I don't think anyone would argue that this is a first growth, and it's almost always a great bottle of wine. Again, Lafite and Latour has less variation in my mind, but if the good is really good, and the not so good can be more variable than Lafite and Latour. But I don't think there's any argument that it'd be a first growth at this point. Well worth the money. Again, one of these wines that you don't want to pass up drinking. And then the last of the official first growth wines of 1855 is Obreon. And so this was the last listed growth wine, or first growth wine in 1855. Interesting to note that at one time, Obreon and Margaux were owned by the same people. So you can kind of see all these things are connected, and you can tell the quality of these things. Again, boringly good. They're quite good. They were exceptional because they were the only winery chosen in the 1855 classification system that comes from a region not on the left bank. This is from the Grave region, so technically not in the Medoc region. Okay, so what they did is actually Obreon. One of the reasons why they were so popular is that their owner actually had a pub or outlet in England which sold the wine, and that was very innovative, and I think that's gained popularity of the wine. It's a good wine. I'm not saying they're not good wine, but that was one of the reasons for its high reputation in outside markets. A long history. It's been produced since 1521, but at that time the estate was called Obreon, and I will have it spelled differently, but I'll have that in the comment section. And it was passed down as part of the dowry of when the mayor of Libourne's daughter got married. The chateau was actually constructed in 1548, so it's got a long history, although there was ownership change. And I didn't realize this, but it has higher percentage of Merlot than any other first growths, even Margaux. So it's up to upward to 40% sometimes. So it could be a softer wine. What I find with Obreon is, again, quality is very consistent. You do get more gravelly and minerally elements to Obreon, and it's a more it's not as fruity and fruit forward, and it's not as aromatic. I'd say it's more gravelly, minerally, dusty than the other first growths that I've been fortunate to drink 20 vintages of Obreon. And again, I don't want to come off as pretentious here. A lot of that is because of a good fortune and the generosity of a lot of good friends and wine connoisseurs. So I'm just really fortunate that people are happy to share wines with me. So I feel fortunate to do that. So some of the memorable ones that I've had, 1940 Obreon, great wine, war vintage, and that also, it's emotional to kind of drink a wine from war vintages in my mind. 64, 85, 89. Those kind of stick out in my mind. My assessment of wine, again, this is pretty easy with first growth. It would be better with some of the other wineries in terms of the assessment. But again, I don't think anyone questions this is a first growth wine. Quality is there. Always good. Little different stylistically than Lafite and Latour and Margaux. But it's interesting and a little bit more. It's on the ethereal side, like thinker's wine, like Lafite to me. Really evokes a lot of emotion, takes a lot of time to process in terms of your mind. So it's a I think a intellectual wine, I would say, like with Lafite. Margaux is a very fragrant wine. Latour is just pure power and pleasure. So that's kind of in my mind how it sticks out. Again, I don't think there's any question that this is a first growth. Good consistency, probably even a little bit more consistency than Margaux. So I don't think there's any argument it's the first growth. Now we come to the most controversial of the first growth wines, Chateau Mouton Rothschild. So it was not rated in 1855 as a first growth wine. It was the top of the list of the second. And I think they were upset about that. But they didn't really know what to do. They weren't strong enough, or they were kind of hesitant. They were discreet. They didn't want to rock the boat. But they thought they were kind of that was not good, right? They were kind of jobbed on it. Actually, they weren't. It's clear that again, the 1855 classification was based on price per barrel. It was clear that they didn't have that type of pricing. They thought they should, but that's different. They didn't meet the criteria. It's pretty clear. But they argued that. A little bit history about this, and they have a number of things that they lobbied about over the years. One of them is that they are the only winery that has stayed the same since 1855. Everyone else has changed ownership. Arguably, Lafite again was not. It was called Chateau Lafite. It wasn't called Lafite Rothschild until 1868. Every other growth wine has changed. Mouton Rothschild has not changed ownership since 1855, so they kind of brag about that. They have the same owners. They were the first winery to bottle at the chateau, which was really innovative in those days. We now think of course, you bottle it yourself because it takes away all the variation and consistency, and you don't know what all these other merchants are going to do with your wine. But that was really innovative. Like they bottled themselves. So they were the first one. A little bit of history about the name. It was part of a vineyard owned by Mouton, and so it was Joseph de Brand bought it in 1720, and it became Brand Mouton. And then when Nathaniel Rothschild bought it in 1853, he changed the name to Mouton Rothschild. And you'll see it a lot with wineries as we go through each one. A lot of it has to do with... A lot of them getting to the first growth stage is the work of Baron Philippe de Rothschild. He has passed away, but he's the guy, he's very innovative. And he spent his whole life lobbying for Mouton to be accepted as a first growth. He thought they were jobbed in 1855. And he went, they did so many innovations. They made so much great wine. And in fact, when they got elevated in 1973, at that time, they were priced like a first growth. So that argument was, well, guys, if you were doing our pricing and now we're priced like first growth, we should be a first growth. That's one of only two changes that have ever been made, and the other one I'll go through is a mistake. So they've never done this. So some people are kind of upset at them, saying, well, you guys, it was just because political clout. It should have never changed. You should have accepted it. 1855 is 1855. So there are some wineries that are upset at them. The Baron doesn't care. He got what he wanted. He got a first growth. and he's innovative enough to, if you look at my Opus 1 video, he did a partnership with the Robert Mondavi. So he's a very innovative guy. The other great thing about Chateau Mouton Rothschild is that they have great labels. So every year they commission an artist to do a label, a different label, and they've had all types of iconic artists do their labels. So it's always very, very colorful. The 2018, I've got a video on that. It's beautiful. This is the 2000 vintage, which is etched with the gold and stuff like that. So that's, the bottle is very expensive, and now the wine is also quite expensive. So they've been great, and they're so beautiful. The labels are so beautiful, but that's not why they're first growth now. It is the wine quality, which is in the last 10 years exceptional. Like, they're making some ridiculously good wines, arguably as good as Latour Lafite any given year, probably some years arguably even better. And their wine style, because Baron Philippe and the family are very oriented to the consumer and the public, they have changed their style of wine to be very consumer friendly. And so they have a real pulse on the palate of people, and that's why their wines are so. I've had the fortune of drinking 22 vintages of Chateau Mouton Rothschild. Some of the memorable ones in my mind, 95, 2003, 2005. But I really think they're really hitting their stride now. The 15, I tasted the 15, the 16 Entrepreneur. Those are exceptional wines. Like 18 is going to be exceptional. 9 and 10 were exceptional. They're really, really hitting on all cylinders in the last 10 years. And if I was if I was just trying to drink for drinking purposes and wanted the best drinking wine or consumer-friendly wine, I would pick Mouton. Mouton is the easiest to understand in terms of the palate. It's not difficult to drink at all. It's very, very balanced, very soothing. So for sure, I mean, there's some people that argue they shouldn't be a first go. They're very, very good wine, and so I don't think there's a huge distinction. But I think because of their all their innovation, they have elevated themselves to that status, and so I think they deserve to be. At the end of this video, I'm going to kind of pan into the different bottles, so you can get close-ups of certain bottles that I haven't shown before. But one of the things is, will this continue? And it will. These will always be the best wines. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that they actually get together all the time, and they kind of trade notes, and they do this. There's also something called the Big Eight, which includes Decem, Cheval Blanc, and Osson, and they get together once a year, all these 8 wineries, and then there's also a Club of 9, which includes Pétrus. They get together and they kind of trade notes, and they make sure that everyone, if there's innovations, they kind of share that, and they kind of keep it in the family. So these 9 wines are not going anywhere. They're kind of have their own little private club, and so the chance of them kind of going to disrepute is not very high. And consequently, these are the wines that will be the most auctionable, that people will collect the most, that will command the greatest prices. So whether it's for drinking, for long-term holding, or for investment purposes, these are always the most important wines out there. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and give me your comments. Until next time, happy drinking. I just wanted to show some labels. So this is kind of the bottle etching that's on Lafite right now, which represents the 5 families. This is a special bottling of 1999. You'll see they've got that special bottling of that. Latour is kind of boring. It's always the same. Likewise, Margaux and Obreon. And Mouton is much more exciting. It's always got different artists and on the top part of that. And so beautiful labels.